Breaking barriers, Nandi-Ndaitwah becomes Namibia's first woman president, a new era for African leadership. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we tell Africa's stories with truth and power. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. Today we witness history in the making. Namibia swears in its first ever female president, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah. What does this moment mean for Africa's democratic journey, gender equity, and future leadership? Stay tuned for a deep dive you won't want to miss. In a moment marked by history, legacy, and a call for integrity, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah was officially sworn in as Namibia's first woman president on Friday, becoming a trailblazer not only for her country, but for the African continent at large. The swearing-in ceremony, held at the State House in Windhoek, was attended by prominent African heads of state, regional leaders, and international dignitaries, symbolizing both the weight and the promise of this unprecedented transition. A symbolic and powerful start. President Nandi-Ndaitwah opened her inauguration speech with a powerful quote from the late Tanzanian statesman Julius Nyerere: "Corruption should be seen as treason." Without hesitation, she affirmed, "And I agree," signaling a bold stand against one of the most endemic challenges facing African democracies today. This quote was more than symbolism. It was a political statement. Coming from a leader who has long advocated for transparency, gender equality, and developmental justice, her stance on corruption lays the groundwork for a reformist administration with the potential to shift Namibia's political trajectory. Pan-African support and a broader feminist milestone. President Nandi-Ndaitwah's inauguration saw a strong show of support from across Africa. Among those in attendance were President Samia Suluhu Hassan of Tanzania, Africa's first female head of state currently in power, alongside João Lourenço, Angola, Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa, Hakainde Hichilema, Zambia, Daniel Chapo, Mozambique, Emerson Mnangagwa, Zimbabwe, Felix Tshisekedi, DRC, William Ruto, Kenya, and Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, Equatorial Guinea, among others. Their presence was a tacit endorsement of Nandi-Ndaitwah's leadership and a recognition of the symbolic breakthrough her presidency represents for women in governance. President Hassan notably praised Nandi-Ndaitwah, saying, "Thank you very much for setting the bar high for the girl child." As Tanzanians, we are happy to see the child we nurtured reaching the highest level. This moment echoes a growing wave of female leadership in Africa. While women leaders remain underrepresented at the executive level, the tide is gradually turning. Countries like Ethiopia, with former President Sahle-Work Zewde, Tanzania, and now Namibia, are beginning to break patriarchal political molds. Nandi-Ndaitwah's rise sets a precedent not just for Namibian girls, but for aspiring women leaders across the continent. A political journey rooted in liberation. Born on October 29, 1952 in Onamutai, northern Namibia, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah's life story is interwoven with the nation's own journey to independence and development. She joined the liberation movement SWAPO at age 14 and played key roles during the party's exile years, representing Namibia's cause in Central and East Africa and participating in critical global negotiations, including the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 435 that led to Namibia's independence in 1990. Her career since independence has been defined by a steady climb through various ministerial roles, including foreign affairs, women affairs and child welfare, information and broadcasting, environment and tourism, and ultimately international relations and cooperation. In 2015, she was appointed Deputy Prime Minister, and in 2024, she was named Vice President before being elected President in December. Her involvement in global advocacy for women's rights is especially notable. She was a leading African negotiator during the landmark 1995 Beijing World Conference on Women and contributed to the groundbreaking UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace and Security in 2000. Her academic credentials further strengthened her leadership foundation, with advanced studies in diplomacy and public administration and multiple honorary awards recognizing her contributions nationally and internationally. A new era post-Mbumba. Outgoing President Nangolo Mbumba, who briefly served following the death of former President Haga Geingob in 2024, delivered his farewell with humility and optimism. To say my tenure was eventful would be an understatement, he said, reflecting on the short but intense period of stewardship. Mbumba expressed full confidence in Nandi-Ndaitwah's leadership. Namibia can look forward to a future filled with hope, promise, and prosperity under her. His endorsement reflects a level of political unity often missing during transitions, especially in African contexts where succession battles frequently trigger instability. A Pan-African comparison, Namibia and the feminist leadership wave. While Namibia is the latest African country to elect a female head of state, the continent has seen a mixed record on gender parity in leadership. According to the Interparliamentary Union, IPU, Rwanda continues to lead globally with the highest percentage of women in parliament, followed by Senegal and South Africa among African nations. However, executive leadership still lags. Female heads of state in Africa, past and present. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Liberia, Africa's first elected female president, 2006-2018. Joyce Banda, Malawi, president from 2012 to 2014. Amina Gurib Fakim, Mauritius, president from 2015 to 2018. Sahle-Work Zewde, Ethiopia, serving since 2018 as ceremonial head of state. Samia Suluhu Hassan, Tanzania, president since 2021. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, Namibia, assumed office in 2025. With Nandi-Ndaitwah, Namibia now joins a small but growing circle of nations redefining leadership narratives through gender inclusion. Her presidency is not only a win for Namibian democracy, but a signal to patriarchal political cultures across Africa that competence and leadership know no gender. Forward-looking governance. Can she deliver on the promise? Expectations are understandably high. With decades of experience, international respect, and deep party loyalty, Nandi-Ndaitwah is seen as a continuity figure within SWAPO. Yet her presidency will be judged not just by symbolic value, but by tangible governance outcomes, especially in three key areas. 1. Anti-corruption. Her strong alignment with Nyereri's view on corruption must be followed by decisive action, transparent procurement processes, judicial reform, and zero tolerance for elite impunity. 2. Economic diversification. Namibia's economy remains heavily reliant on mining and agriculture. There is urgent need for investments in technology, manufacturing, and green energy, especially as the world pivots toward climate resilience. 3. Youth and women empowerment. Nearly 60% of Namibia's population is under 25. Strategic policy must unlock youth potential through education, skills development, and job creation, while elevating women beyond tokenism in government and business. 4. Regional diplomacy. With her foreign affairs background, President Nandi-Ndaitwah is uniquely positioned to strengthen Namibia's diplomatic role within SADC and AU frameworks, especially on peace building, gender equality, and climate justice. Challenges on the horizon, the complex reality of leading in a transitional era. President Nandi-Ndaitwah inherits a Namibia grappling with structural inequalities, youth unemployment, climate vulnerability, and a fragile post-pandemic recovery. While her international reputation and domestic goodwill provide a strong launchpad, navigating the realities of governance in a polarized socio-economic environment will require bold, pragmatic, and inclusive leadership. Despite its relative political stability since independence in 1990, Namibia has faced growing discontent over widening wealth gaps, inadequate housing in urban centers like Windhoek, and perceptions of elite capture of state resources. The post-COVID economic slowdown, coupled with global inflationary pressures, has strained the livelihoods of ordinary Namibians. Africa-wide comparison, female leadership, governance reforms, and the path forward. Across the continent, the emergence of female leaders has often generated renewed optimism about governance reforms and inclusive policy agendas. However, as seen in Liberia with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and in Malawi with Joyce Banda, symbolism alone does not guarantee systemic transformation. These leaders faced entrenched political elites, male-dominated party structures, and institutional inertia that limited the scope of rapid reforms. In Tanzania, President Samia Suluhu Hassan has taken a cautiously reformist approach, reversing some of the harshest policies of her predecessor while still balancing internal party pressures from the dominant Chama cha Mapinduzi, CCM. Her administration offers a case study in how female heads of state must constantly negotiate patriarchal political institutions while trying to drive meaningful change. Namibia's own Liberation Party, SWAPO, remains dominant but has seen internal divisions and declining public trust in recent years, particularly among younger voters and civil society. Nandi-Ndaitwah must therefore assert her authority while carefully managing party dynamics, maintaining continuity where necessary, but reforming where the public demands change. The role of regional integration and Pan-African leadership. With experience in diplomacy and international negotiations, Nandi-Ndaitwah has a rare opportunity to position Namibia as a key voice in shaping the African Union's Agenda 2063. Her focus on anti-corruption, gender equality, and peace-building aligns with the AU's core aspirations. Namibia could also become a more active player within the Southern African Development Community, SADC, where issues like the Mozambique insurgency, electoral disputes in Zimbabwe and the DRC, and migration concerns continue to demand coordinated responses. Her presidency might strengthen Namibia's moral authority in the region, especially if backed by domestic reforms. Moreover, the growing economic interdependence within the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, offers a chance for Namibia to diversify its export base and attract investment. The president's foreign policy should seek to leverage Namibia's strategic location and political stability to become a regional trade and logistics hub. Youth, innovation, and the digital future. Namibia's youth population, like much of Africa's, presents both a challenge and an opportunity. With nearly 40% youth unemployment, expectations for job creation are high. President Nandi-Ndaitwah will need to work closely with the private sector to support entrepreneurship, digital literacy, and innovation hubs that align with the continent's shift toward a tech-driven economy. Countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and Rwanda are leading examples in digital innovation ecosystems. Namibia, with its strong telecommunications infrastructure and relatively high literacy rate, has the potential to follow suit. The Nandi-Ndaitwah administration should prioritize public-private partnerships in digital education, fintech, and agritech to unlock youth-led economic growth. A feminist foreign policy. Given her long-standing advocacy for women's rights globally, observers are watching to see whether Nandi-Ndaitwah will adopt a feminist foreign policy framework, an approach that Sweden pioneered and countries like Canada, Mexico, and Chile have experimented with. Such a policy prioritizes gender equality, peace, and human rights in international relations and development cooperation. If implemented, Namibia could emerge as a leading African voice on issues such as gender-based violence in conflict zones, women's leadership in peacekeeping and mediation, climate resilience with gender lens, advocacy for UN reforms that amplify African women's voices. This would not only elevate Namibia's global standing, but also reinforce domestic commitments to gender parity and social justice. The road ahead. Navigating legacy and expectations. While Nandi-Ndaitwah's ascension to the presidency is a personal victory and a collective milestone for African women, it is only the beginning of what will be a demanding leadership journey. She must walk the tightrope of honoring SWAPO's liberation legacy while modernizing its policy frameworks to address 21st century realities. She must engage opposition voices constructively, revive trust in state institutions, and deliver on urgent social needs, housing, healthcare, quality education, and food security amid limited fiscal space. The rise of civic movements and an increasingly assertive youth demographic means that legitimacy will no longer be earned by party affiliation alone, but by performance and accountability. The continent watches Netumbo. Nandi-Ndaitwah's presidency carries the weight of expectation from women, youth, and progressives across the continent. It is a chance to redefine what leadership looks like in Africa, not just in terms of gender, but in terms of values, integrity, service, vision, and courage. Her administration's success or failure will not only impact Namibia's trajectory, but will also influence the broader conversation about gender, governance, and generational change in Africa's political systems. Will Nandi-Ndaitwah break the mold and usher in a new political era? Or will her presidency be stifled by the same institutional and political constraints that have muted many reformist dreams before her? The watchful eyes of civil society and the media. As President Nandi-Ndaitwah settles into office, Namibia's vibrant civil society and increasingly assertive independent media will play critical roles in holding her administration accountable. Over the years, Namibian civil organizations such as the Namibia Institute for Democracy and Sister Namibia have been vocal about transparency, gender equity, youth empowerment, and press freedom. Their expectations will not ease now that a woman leads the country. In fact, they are likely to intensify. These stakeholders have already begun shaping public discourse around governance priorities, calling for reforms to public procurement systems, the judiciary, the education sector, and land redistribution policies. Any sign of stagnation or the perception of elite preservation under a different face will face swift and organized resistance. In this regard, President Nandi-Ndaitwah must strike a delicate balance, welcoming civic engagement while preventing polarization. The opportunity lies in institutionalizing citizen feedback mechanisms, promoting open data governance, and engaging youth activists and gender rights campaigners as development partners rather than adversaries. Learning from Ellen Johnson. Sirleaf, a cautionary parallel. For all the historic admiration Ellen Johnson Sirleaf received globally as Africa's first elected female president, her administration in Liberia was not without serious domestic criticism. While Sirleaf won a Nobel Peace Prize and improved Liberia's global image, she struggled to dismantle entrenched corruption networks, and her government's ties to political elites weakened public trust over time. President Nandi-Ndaitwah would do well to study Liberia's experience, not as a warning, but as a guidepost. Symbolism must always translate into structural transformation. Her long-standing credibility and revolutionary history give her a strong moral compass, but it is political will and strategic courage that will determine her legacy. Moreover, she must be cautious not to become the figurehead of continuity for a political elite unwilling to embrace reform. The youth especially are watching, not just for what she says, but for the tough decisions she is willing to make. Women in politics? Will Nandi-Ndaitwah build a gender-inclusive cabinet? Beyond her personal achievement, one of the most anticipated moves is the composition of her executive cabinet. Will she increase the number of women in key leadership positions beyond token appointments? Will gender parity become a deliberate part of her policy direction? In Rwanda, women make up more than 60% of parliament, and in Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed once appointed a 50-50 gender-balanced cabinet, though several women later exited. These examples show both the progress and fragility of such gains. Namibia has made strides, but women are still underrepresented in senior financial, security, and energy portfolios. By appointing women to strategic ministries, such as finance, defense, and mines, Nandi-Ndaitwah could not only challenge norms, but also deepen women's contributions to national development. Moreover, enacting gender-responsive budgeting and establishing a monitoring framework for gender equality across all ministries could institutionalize her commitment. Namibia's regional role, a bridge between Anglophone and Lusophone Africa? Namibia's geographic and linguistic position, straddling the southern cone with strong historical ties to Angola, places it in a unique spot to strengthen regional cooperation across language and colonial divides. Nandi-Ndaitwah's fluency in Pan-African diplomacy, coupled with her experience engaging Francophone and Lusophone partners during her time at the United Nations and African Union, makes her a natural bridge builder. Her presidency may see Namibia playing a more active mediation role in Mozambique's insurgency in Cabo Delgado, post-election transitions in the DRC and Zimbabwe, cross-border infrastructure projects with Angola and Botswana, natural resource management treaties in the Okavango and Zambezi basins. At a time when multilateralism is under threat globally and several African nations are navigating contested transitions, Namibia under Nandi-Ndaitwah can present itself as a model of peaceful succession and inclusive governance. Climate leadership and the green transition. Namibia has been praised for its ambitious green hydrogen project and efforts to embrace renewable energy as part of its economic diversification. Under President Geingob, the groundwork was laid for making Namibia a regional hub for green energy production, particularly hydrogen and solar power. Now, with Nandi-Ndaitwah in power, the question is whether these projects will move from vision to implementation. Climate change remains an existential threat to Namibia, especially in the semi-arid regions that face increasing desertification and water scarcity. Her administration must ensure that local communities benefit from green energy investments, land rights are protected, environmental impact assessments are transparent, and Namibia avoids becoming a green extraction economy dominated by foreign corporations. In this area, she can join forces with other African leaders like Kenya's William Ruto and Ghana's Nana Akufo-Addo, who are calling for climate justice and new financing mechanisms for the global south. Balancing foreign investment and sovereignty. As Namibia positions itself as a potential hub for green energy and logistics under AFCFTA, President Nandi-Ndaitwah faces the critical task of balancing foreign direct investment, FDI, with national interests and sovereignty. Multinational interest in Namibia's natural resources, particularly uranium, lithium, rare earth minerals, and green hydrogen, has grown significantly. However, past deals have raised public concern about resource exploitation without commensurate local benefit. To change this narrative, the president must implement a transparent investment framework with three core pillars. 1. Local content requirements. Enforce policies that mandate foreign investors to partner with Namibian firms, create jobs for citizens, and invest in skills transfer. 2. Community engagement. Ensure that extractive projects come with robust corporate social responsibility frameworks that provide clean water, schools, and health services for surrounding communities. 3. Revenue transparency. Commit to public disclosure of mining and energy contracts, taxation details, and the use of royalties, following the example of countries like Ghana under the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI. By doing so, Namibia could emerge as a continental example of responsible resource governance, bridging development goals with equitable wealth distribution. The imperative of judicial reform and rule of law. Another pillar that could define the Nandi-Ndaitwah presidency is the reform of Namibia's judicial and legal systems. While the country has long been praised for an independent judiciary, delays in delivery of justice, prison overcrowding, and limited legal access for rural communities remain persistent issues. President Nandi-Ndaitwah has a rare opportunity to strengthen judicial independence, especially by increasing funding to courts and legal aid services, digitizing the justice system to reduce case backlogs, appointing more women judges to balance the gender deficit in the judiciary, supporting traditional courts and customary systems with legal harmonization tools. By ensuring that the rule of law functions not only in the capital but across the entire nation, her government can reinforce citizen trust in the state key ingredient in any democratic consolidation process. Public sector reform and trust rebuilding. Namibia's public sector, while relatively well managed compared to many of its peers, still suffers from inefficiency, bureaucratic bottlenecks, and allegations of nepotism and favoritism. The infamous fish rot corruption scandal, where high-level officials were implicated in bribery and embezzlement tied to fishing licenses, shook public trust in government institutions. Nandi-Ndaitwah's anti-corruption stance, signaled by her reference to Nyerere, will ring hollow unless it translates into the establishment of a truly independent anti-corruption commission, real-time audits of key ministries and parastatals, open recruitment processes for public service jobs, mandatory asset declarations by all senior public officials, including ministers and their families. These reforms would go beyond symbolism and begin the arduous task of rebuilding public trust, an essential foundation for sustainable governance. The rural-urban divide, inclusive development or elite growth. One of Namibia's enduring challenges remains the sharp divide between urban centers, particularly Windhoek, Walvis Bay, and Swakopmund, and the deeply impoverished rural regions such as Kunene, Kavango, and parts of Zambezi. While urban areas have seen increased infrastructure development, service delivery in rural communities remains patchy. Under Nandi-Ndaitwah's leadership, decentralization should become more than a policy buzzword. She must empower regional and local councils with budgetary autonomy, strengthen rural healthcare and education services, and incentivize investment outside urban corridors. Her own upbringing and political grounding in rural Namibia give her the credibility to lead such a push, but it will require aligning central government priorities with localized development goals. Continental influence, a voice for reform within the African Union. Within the African Union, Namibia under Nandi-Ndaitwah can champion critical institutional reforms, particularly AU accountability, advocating for stronger enforcement mechanisms to address unconstitutional changes of government, particularly in the Sahel and Central Africa regions. Gender equity in AU structures, pushing for the full implementation of the AU gender strategy and increased female representation in leadership roles across AU organs and peacekeeping missions. Democratizing the AU, supporting civil society engagement with AU institutions, and opening AU summits to broader media coverage and public participation. Her presidency coincides with a critical moment when the African Union must transition from a club of heads of state to a people-centered institution responsive to grassroots realities. If she seizes this moment, Nandi-Ndaitwah could become one of the most transformative African voices on the continental stage. Education, innovation, and skills for the future. As Namibia's first female president, Nandi-Ndaitwah also carries the hopes of a generation seeking transformation in the education sector. While the country has made significant progress in expanding access to primary education and improving literacy rates, challenges remain in the quality of instruction, infrastructure, and alignment with labor market demands. The Fourth Industrial Revolution, 4IR, with its emphasis on artificial intelligence, robotics, data science, and automation, demands a shift in national education strategy, from rote learning to skills-based learning. Nandi-Ndaitwah's administration must now prioritize 1. Curriculum reform, emphasize digital literacy, coding, problem-solving, and entrepreneurship from the primary level through to tertiary education. 2. Teacher development, upskill teachers, and provide incentives to retain talent in public schools, especially in underserved regions. 3. Technical and vocational training, TVET. Rebrand and invest in TVET institutions to meet Namibia's economic needs in renewable energy, construction, logistics, and agribusiness. 4. Digital inclusion. Expand broadband access and equip rural schools with digital tools to bridge the education divide. Namibia can draw inspiration from Rwanda's investment in smart classrooms and Kenya's tech incubators, which have helped create ecosystems where innovation can thrive. If Nandi-Ndaitwah positions education reform as a national priority, she could shape a workforce capable of driving a knowledge-based economy and reducing reliance on extractive industries. Health equity and women's well-being. Another pressing area is healthcare reform, particularly maternal health, reproductive rights, and mental health services. As a longtime advocate for women's and children's rights, Nandi-Ndaitwah is expected to lead a gender-responsive health agenda. According to the World Bank, Namibia's maternal mortality ratio remains high, with rural areas facing shortages of skilled health professionals and critical medical supplies. Her government must prioritize upgrading rural clinics and investing in mobile health services, expanding sexual and reproductive health education and access, training more midwives and nurses to serve in remote areas, integrating mental health into primary healthcare delivery. A holistic healthcare strategy that places women at the center will not only reduce preventable deaths, but also empower women to participate more fully in the economy and politics. National identity and reconciliation. Namibia, like many African nations, carries the weight of historical injustices, from colonial occupation and forced labor under German rule to systemic inequalities that persist decades after independence. Nandi-Ndaitwah's presidency may be an opportunity to deepen national healing and forge a new social contract rooted in dignity, equity, and inclusion. To this end, she could consider launching a National Reconciliation and Social Justice Commission that brings together traditional leaders, youth, faith communities, and historians to address unresolved grievances, including land dispossession, tribal marginalization, and gender-based violence. A leader who acknowledges the past while charting a new future could offer a blueprint for other African nations struggling to reconcile historical wounds with nation building. The symbolism of her gender, the substance of her agenda. As the first woman to hold Namibia's highest office, Nandi-Ndaitwah will face both extraordinary support and intense scrutiny, not because of her policies, but because of what she represents. In many African contexts, female leaders are still judged by unrealistic expectations. They must be transformational, maternal, incorruptible, and politically savvy, all at once. Yet true progress lies in normalizing women in power, not as exceptional figures, but as competent leaders with the right to succeed or fail like any other. If her administration is inclusive, transparent, and reform-driven, it could redefine how Namibians and Africans view female leadership in executive governance. Her ability to deliver on this promise will rest not only on her personal strength, but also on her willingness to build alliances across generational, ethnic, gender, and political divides. She must create space for the youth, listen to dissent, and be willing to challenge even those within her own party when justice and equity demand it. A historic moment, a defining test. The swearing-in of Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah has already reshaped Namibia's place in the history books. But history is not only made by firsts, it is defined by what follows. The African continent is watching. The youth are watching. The women who have long been excluded from boardrooms, ballot boxes, and budget tables are watching. Will President Nandi-Ndaitwah be remembered as a symbol of what is possible or as the architect of what is transformational? Safeguarding democratic institutions in a shifting regional landscape. President Nandi-Ndaitwah's leadership emerges at a time when democratic backsliding is becoming a serious concern across parts of the African continent. Military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and most recently Niger have raised alarms about the fragility of constitutional rule. Meanwhile, long-serving leaders in countries like Uganda, Equatorial Guinea, and Cameroon have weakened term limits, suppressed opposition, and eroded judicial independence. Namibia, by contrast, has remained a stable democracy since independence in 1990. Its peaceful transitions of power, vibrant multi-party system, and independent judiciary have made it a quiet but consistent model of democratic resilience in southern Africa. Under Nandi-Ndaitwah, the challenge will be to not only maintain these democratic gains, but enhance them in the face of growing regional instability and internal political pressures. This means strengthening electoral institutions, ensuring the Electoral Commission of Namibia remains independent, transparent, and adequately funded to resist political manipulation, protecting press freedom, safeguarding the rights of journalists to investigate and report without harassment or censorship, especially in the age of disinformation and online surveillance, expanding civic space, creating policies that support NGOs, human rights defenders, and youth movements to thrive without fear of political retribution. By reinforcing democratic norms, Namibia can continue to punch above its weight in the region and serve as a bulwark against authoritarian contagion. A foreign policy rooted in Pan-Africanism and multilateralism, Nandi-Ndaitwah's extensive background in international relations, having served as Namibia's foreign minister and a key figure in global diplomacy, positions her well to shape a bold foreign policy rooted in Pan-African ideals and multilateral cooperation. As African nations navigate increasing geopolitical competition from China and the US to Russia and the EU, her administration can advocate for Africa-first diplomacy that prioritizes regional self-determination, economic integration, and collective security. Key foreign policy pillars might include AFCFTA implementation, working with SADC partners to remove trade barriers and accelerate regional infrastructure projects that support cross-border commerce. Peace and security, supporting AU-led peace operations and mediating conflicts in hotspots like Eastern DRC, Sudan, and the Horn of Africa. Global South solidarity, collaborating with BRICS, the non-aligned movement, and UN bodies to reform global institutions, including advocating for a permanent African seat on the UN Security Council. Climate diplomacy, positioning Namibia as a leader on climate negotiations by pushing for loss and damage financing, green technology transfer, and equitable access to global climate funds. With her reputation and experience, President Nandi-Ndaitwah can help amplify Africa's collective voice on the world stage, advancing a vision of just, equitable global order where African nations are not mere recipients of aid or arenas of proxy competition, but agents of transformation and innovation. Harnessing the African feminist wave. A continental responsibility. Nandi-Ndaitwah's rise adds momentum to the African feminist movement, which is no longer confined to activism, but increasingly entering the corridors of power, policymaking, and economics. Across the continent, women-led movements are challenging gender-based violence, pushing for equal pay, demanding reproductive rights, and asserting their roles as peace builders and decision-makers. Her presidency presents an opportunity to institutionalize this momentum. Namibia could lead a continental initiative that brings together women heads of state, ministers, activists, and business leaders to draft a Pan-African Women's Leadership Charter that outlines commitments to gender-balanced governance, economic empowerment, and political representation. Launch a Women's Economic Empowerment Fund for rural entrepreneurs, modeled after successful initiatives like Rwanda's Women Guarantee Fund or Nigeria's Women Entrepreneurship Platform. Host a biannual Pan-African Women's Summit to share best practices in leadership, legal reforms, education, and tech inclusion. By turning personal history into collective empowerment, Nandi-Ndaitwah can help shape a continental agenda where feminism is not simply about breaking ceilings, but rebuilding the entire structure of society in ways that are just, inclusive, and sustainable. The test of time, vision versus execution. Even with international acclaim and historic symbolism, President Nandi-Ndaitwah's success will ultimately depend on execution. Visionary speeches, anti-corruption slogans, and symbolic appointments will not be enough if they are not backed by strong institutions, credible reforms, and measurable outcomes. The Namibian people are not simply looking for inspiration, they are demanding results. They want jobs for their children, security in their communities, transparent government spending, affordable housing and healthcare, a future that feels possible, not postponed. To meet these demands, Nandi-Ndaitwah must move swiftly and decisively. Her administration must be one of implementation, inclusivity, and integrity. She must create systems that outlast her term and deepen the democratic ethos of Namibia long after her presidency ends. Building a legacy. Institutions over individuals. One of the greatest challenges in post-colonial African governance has been the over-reliance on charismatic individuals rather than resilient institutions. Too often, a leader's departure results in systemic regression due to the absence of strong checks, balances, and independent systems of governance. President Nandi-Ndaitwah has the rare opportunity to break this cycle and set a new national standard by focusing on institution building rather than personality cults. This means institutionalizing reforms through legislation, empowering watchdog bodies like the Auditor General and Anti-Corruption Commission, and depoliticizing public service appointments. It also involves pushing for constitutional amendments that prioritize meritocracy, transparency, and intergenerational inclusion, a particularly vital move given Namibia's increasingly vocal youth population. By creating systems that do not depend on any one leader's morality or goodwill, Nandi-Ndaitwah could do for Namibia what former President Nelson Mandela did for South Africa: redefine leadership as service to institutions and the people, not just tenure in office. Economic diversification, moving beyond extraction. Namibia's economy has historically depended on extractive industries, diamonds, uranium, and other minerals, leaving the country vulnerable to global commodity shocks. While recent efforts toward green hydrogen development and tourism revival show promise, President Nandi-Ndaitwah must now lay out a comprehensive roadmap for broad-based economic diversification. This roadmap must include investment in agriculture and agro-processing. With vast tracts of arable land, Namibia has untapped potential to become a major food exporter in southern Africa. Tourism infrastructure and cultural economy development. Namibia's stunning natural landscapes, unique heritage sites, and biodiversity offer immense potential if the sector is made more inclusive, especially for rural communities. Innovation hubs and digital startups, policies that promote affordable internet, youth innovation labs, and tax incentives for tech-based businesses can create new employment streams and reduce brain drain. Public-private partnerships in infrastructure, roads, rail, and port development, especially through Walvis Bay, can position Namibia as a logistics gateway between southern Africa and global markets. However, for diversification to be inclusive, economic reforms must be anchored in equity and redistribution, ensuring that wealth generated from national resources doesn't benefit only a political or business elite, but also reaches the majority of citizens still grappling with poverty and inequality. Youth engagement, a generation that won't wait. Namibia's youth represent both a demographic majority and a democratic force. They are educated, connected, outspoken, and increasingly disillusioned. High unemployment, lack of political representation, and the slow pace of social mobility have fueled frustration, often expressed through protests and social media movements. If Nandi-Ndaitwah is to keep this generation engaged in nation-building rather than disillusioned by systemic stagnation, her administration must create a presidential youth advisory council to provide direct input into national policy and monitor youth-targeted programs. Pass legislation mandating youth quotas in local and national governance structures. Introduce a national youth employment guarantee scheme modeled after Ghana's NABCO or South Africa's Youth Employment Service, YES, initiative. Invest in arts, culture, and creative industries, platforms that resonate with young people and drive economic growth through music, fashion, film, and digital content. Youth participation should not be a tokenistic add-on, but a foundational pillar of policy development and implementation. Gender and intersectionality, the next frontier. While her presidency marks a giant leap for gender representation at the top, President Nandi-Ndaitwah must go further by addressing intersectional inequalities that affect Namibian women, especially rural women, indigenous communities, women with disabilities, and LGBTQ+ individuals who remain marginalized in many policy spaces. To truly lead a feminist administration, she must implement a national gender equality action plan that sets targets for political participation, education access, pay equity, and legal protections. Strengthen GBV response systems, including police training, survivor shelters, and fast-tracked court procedures for sexual violence cases. Push for inclusive legislation that protects the rights and dignity of all citizens, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation, within Namibia's cultural and constitutional framework. By addressing gender inequality not as a women's issue, but as a national development priority, her leadership can mainstream gender justice across every layer of society. Harnessing traditional leadership and indigenous knowledge. One of the underutilized assets in Namibia's nation-building process is the role of traditional authorities and indigenous knowledge systems. Namibia's diverse ethnic groups, including the Ovambo, Herero, Damara, San, and Nama, possess centuries of cultural wisdom and environmental stewardship practices that can support national development, especially in areas like climate adaptation, land management, and community justice. President Nandi-Ndaitwah's administration can bridge the gap between modern governance and traditional leadership by formally integrating traditional leaders into local development councils, ensuring they have a voice in budgeting, land use planning, and service delivery. Protecting indigenous land rights and ensuring communal lands are not exploited by corporate interests without the free, prior, and informed consent of local populations. Documenting and preserving indigenous languages and cultural practices, which are rapidly declining in the face of globalization and urban migration. Leveraging traditional conflict resolution mechanisms to strengthen community cohesion and reduce reliance on overburdened formal courts. By valuing indigenous knowledge and governance structures, the administration can promote inclusive development that resonates with rural populations and reinforces a uniquely Namibian identity. Digital governance and the future of public service delivery. In a world increasingly shaped by digital transformation, President Nandi-Ndaitwah has an opportunity to modernize Namibia's public administration through e-governance. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed gaps in digital infrastructure and government service delivery, but also highlighted the potential of technology to increase efficiency, reduce corruption, and expand access. Her administration can lead the way by digitizing key government services, from tax registration and licensing to land deeds and birth certificates, creating a national digital ID system to ensure all citizens, including those in remote areas, can access public services securely and efficiently. Establishing data privacy and cybersecurity frameworks, especially as Namibia adopts more digital tools across health, finance, and education sectors. Supporting digital literacy campaigns to ensure no citizen is left behind in the digital shift. By embracing technology not as a luxury but as a governance imperative, Nandi-Ndaitwah can reduce bureaucracy, close service delivery gaps, and increase transparency across government institutions. Diaspora engagement, unlocking a global network. The Namibian diaspora, spread across Southern Africa, Europe, North America, and beyond, remains an untapped resource in the country's socio-economic transformation. Many Namibians abroad possess expertise, capital, and global networks that could support innovation, investment, and advocacy. President Nandi-Ndaitwah, with her deep foreign policy experience, is well positioned to implement a comprehensive diaspora engagement strategy, including diaspora bonds and investment incentives to channel remittances into national development projects, skills transfer and mentorship programs that allow professionals abroad to train or collaborate with local institutions, voting rights and political representation for Namibians living outside the country, strengthening their link to national development and governance. Cultural diplomacy initiatives to elevate Namibia's global image through the arts, sports, education, and tourism. With the right policies, the diaspora can move from being passive observers to active stakeholders in shaping Namibia's future. Food security and agricultural transformation. Namibia remains vulnerable to food insecurity, especially due to climate-induced droughts and limited agricultural diversification. For many rural communities, subsistence farming is no longer sustainable without state support, access to modern technologies, and improved infrastructure. Nandi-Ndaitwah's government must prioritize agricultural transformation as a strategic pillar of national development. Key initiatives could include subsidizing irrigation infrastructure and drought-resistant seeds in arid and semi-arid regions, investing in value chains and storage facilities to reduce post-harvest losses and increase earnings for smallholder farmers, expanding agricultural extension services, especially for women and youth farmers, establishing community cooperatives that give small-scale farmers greater market access and collective bargaining power. Food security is not just an economic issue. It is a matter of sovereignty, resilience, and public health. A self-sufficient Namibia will be better positioned to weather global shocks and protect its most vulnerable citizens. Regional integration and strategic infrastructure. Development Namibia's geographic positioning, with its strategic port at Walvis Bay and borders with Angola, Botswana, Zambia, and South Africa, offers immense potential for becoming a regional trade and logistics hub under the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA. President Nandi-Ndaitwah's administration has a golden opportunity to deepen regional integration through infrastructure expansion and economic cooperation. To harness this potential, the following priorities must be pursued. Accelerate the Trans-Kalahari and Trans-Caprivi corridors to improve transportation links between Namibia and key SADC countries. These corridors will boost the movement of goods, lower transportation costs, and expand regional trade. Modernize Walvis Bay port facilities and create special economic zones to attract value-added manufacturing, warehousing, and export-oriented investments. Invest in cross-border energy and water infrastructure projects, including grid interconnections and shared renewable energy plants with neighbors like Angola and Botswana. Streamline customs and border procedures using digital platforms to reduce delays and corruption at crossing points. Such infrastructure-led development will not only create jobs and stimulate investment, but also strengthen Namibia's position as a vital node in continental trade routes, enhancing its influence in both SADC and AfCFTA frameworks. Environmental stewardship, balancing growth and sustainability. Namibia is internationally recognized for its conservation policies, particularly community-based natural resource management, CBNRM, which allows local communities to benefit from tourism and wildlife preservation. However, climate change is now threatening these gains through prolonged droughts, land degradation, and biodiversity loss. President Nandi-Ndaitwah must build on Namibia's environmental legacy by advancing a green development agenda that balances economic growth with sustainability. Key focus areas should include scaling up renewable energy investments, especially in solar, wind, and green hydrogen, with a clear strategy for domestic job creation and local ownership. Strengthening environmental protection laws to ensure that mining, tourism, and agriculture do not compromise fragile ecosystems, especially in desert and coastal areas. Expanding climate adaptation programs, including early warning systems, sustainable water management, and community-based resilience projects in vulnerable regions. Championing Africa's voice on climate justice, pushing for loss and damage financing, technology transfer, and climate reparations at global forums such as COP summits. A green Namibia can position itself as a model for sustainable development, an increasingly important identity in a global economy transitioning away from carbon-intensive models. Social protection and equity, leaving no one behind. Despite Namibia's classification as an upper-middle-income country, inequality remains among the highest in the world. Vast disparities exist between urban and rural areas, formal and informal workers, and privileged and marginalized ethnic groups. The lingering effects of colonial dispossession and apartheid-era spatial planning still manifest in housing shortages, landlessness, and youth unemployment. President Nandi-Ndaitwah's administration must prioritize inclusive social protection policies that provide a safety net for the most vulnerable. These could include universal child and elderly grants, scaled up to reach more rural families and informal workers. Expansion of the National Health Insurance Scheme, ensuring that healthcare access is not determined by income or geography. Affordable housing programs for low-income earners, particularly in overcrowded informal settlements around Windhoek, Oshakati, and Walvis Bay. Land redistribution and reform policies that prioritize equity and productive use, avoiding elite capture or political manipulation. By anchoring her presidency in a rights-based inclusive development framework, Nandi-Ndaitwah can redefine governance as a tool for dignity and justice, not just economic growth. Cultural diplomacy and national unity. In a multi-ethnic and multilingual nation, forging national unity remains an ongoing task. President Nandi-Ndaitwah's rise to power offers a symbolic moment to promote cultural reconciliation, linguistic diversity, and national pride rooted in mutual respect. Her administration could establish a National Arts and Culture Fund to promote Namibian storytelling, music, fashion, theater, and heritage preservation. Civic education campaigns to foster democratic values, constitutional literacy, and social cohesion, especially among youth. Annual national forums for inter-ethnic and interfaith dialogue, helping prevent the rise of identity-based tensions or political polarization. Support for public broadcasting and creative industries to reflect the stories, hopes, and histories of all Namibians, not just elite voices. Culture is not merely a soft power tool. It is a foundation for unity, healing, and identity in a country that seeks to move from its colonial past toward a collective future. Public trust and the ethics of leadership. Ultimately, the legitimacy of President Nandi-Ndaitwah's administration will hinge on its ability to maintain and grow public trust, a scarce commodity in many parts of Africa, where political leadership is often associated with personal enrichment, broken promises, and elite insulation. Having positioned herself as a principled leader grounded in revolutionary ethics and Pan-African ideals, Nandi-Ndaitwah must now translate those values into a governance style that is open, ethical, and responsive. She must demonstrate that leadership is not a privilege for the few, but a responsibility to the many. This includes regular public engagements and transparent communication, not just during crises or elections, but as part of ongoing democratic accountability. Leading by example in lifestyle and decision-making, ensuring that public funds are used for public good, and that corruption is not tolerated at any level of government. Mentoring the next generation of leaders, especially young women, and creating succession pathways that prevent leadership monopolies. In doing so, she not only consolidates her own legacy, but contributes to a new political culture in Namibia and across Africa, one where leadership is measured not by how long one rules, but by how one transforms lives. A message to African leaders. The time for transformative leadership is now. President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah's ascension to power is more than a Namibian milestone. It is a call to action for all African leaders. In a continent rich in potential but often restrained by misgovernance, her leadership embodies what Africa desperately needs. Vision rooted in liberation history. Leadership shaped by service and governance informed by equity and inclusion. African leaders must take heed. Democracy is not just about elections. It is about delivering dignity. Women belong at every level of decision-making, not for optics, but for transformation. Public office is a trust, not an inheritance. Serve to uplift, not to accumulate. Youth are not the leaders of tomorrow. They are the power of today. Engage them now. Sustainable development is not optional. It is the only path forward. Summary of key messages. 1. Historic achievement. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah becomes Namibia's first female president, representing a transformative moment for gender equality in African leadership. 2. Governance priorities. Her administration faces urgent expectations to tackle corruption, youth unemployment, economic diversification, and democratic deepening. 3. Continental implications. Her presidency reinforces the call for feminist governance, Pan-African cooperation, and a shift toward inclusive development models across Africa. 4. Institutional strength. The success of her presidency will depend on building strong, accountable institutions rather than charismatic personal rule. 5. Sustainable vision. A balanced approach to economic growth, climate resilience, indigenous inclusion, and digital transformation is key to Namibia's long-term success. 6. Public trust. Leadership must be ethical, transparent, and anchored in public service, not self-service. President Nandi-Ndaitwah now carries the hopes of millions, not only as a symbol of what is possible, but as a test of what can be achieved when vision, courage, and integrity converge at the highest levels of power. Africa is watching, the world is watching, and history is waiting to be written again. Thank you for watching. You've just heard the full story, raw, bold, and unfiltered. As Namibia steps into a new era with President Nandi-Ndaitwah at the helm, the rest of Africa watches, learns, and dares to dream. What are your thoughts on Africa's future under more inclusive leadership? Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss bold analysis from across the continent. This is the Bold African Voice, BAV, amplifying Africa one story at a time.